The file landed on Darren Holt's work slate at 03:40 in the morning, station time. Not because it was urgent, not because someone wanted him to see it early. It landed then because that was when the GTA automated dispatch system ran its daily sort, and Darren's name was the last one on the list. He was already awake. He was always already awake at that hour. He had a habit of lying in his bunk and watching the ceiling of his rented quarters on Dren Station and thinking about mechanical things. Airlock tolerances, pressure cycling patterns, the way a bad seal always announced itself in small ways before it announced itself in catastrophic ones. His brain did not know how to rest without something to chew on. He read the file in the dark, the screen light making his face look pale and flat. The assignment was a survey job on Korova 7, a mid-rim transit relay station declared dead and decommissioned 40 years ago after a reactor cascade. His job was simple: dock, walk the station, fill out the GTA decommission survey form, certify that the structure was beyond recovery, and leave. Demolition drones were scheduled to arrive 40 days after his departure. The whole thing was supposed to take 2 weeks at most, though he had been given a 6-week supply allotment just in case. There was a note at the bottom of the file, added manually by his supervising officer, a Toruvian named Raylith. It said, "Previous contractors declined. Radiation tolerance issue. Confirmed within human survivable parameters. Standard suit sufficient. This is a formality, Holt. Don't make it complicated." Darren read that last line twice. He got up, made himself a ration of pressed grain and water, and read the file from the beginning again. He was a methodical person. He did not like going into any job without understanding what he was walking into, even the simple ones. Especially the simple ones, in his experience, had a way of becoming something else. The technical data on Korova 7 was sparse. Reactor cascade on cycle 4372.14. Station evacuated. Transit lanes rerouted. Facility sealed. 40 years of silence. The station had been a mid-rimway station of significant size. The file mentioned a population census from 2 years before the accident that listed the station's resident and transit population at just under 9,000 souls. That number was followed, several lines down, by a single sentence: personnel status at time of decommission, evacuated. Darren looked at that sentence for a while, not because anything in it seemed wrong, just because something in the way it was written felt like a door that had been closed very firmly. He went to work. His shuttle, the Marrow, was a GTA contract vessel, old, utilitarian, and reliable in the way that things become reliable when they have been repaired so many times that all the weak parts have long since been replaced. Darren had maintained it himself for 3 years and knew every sound it made and what each sound meant. He loaded his supply crates, filed his departure manifest with Dren Station Traffic Control, and left without talking to anyone. The transit to Korova 7 took 11 days. He spent most of that time in the Marrow's small workshop bay, running maintenance checks and reading. He pulled everything publicly available on Korova 7, which was not much. GTA records on the station were heavily summarized. Independent shipping logs from before the accident described it as a busy, functional hub, good fuel prices, reliable docking staff, a small market district on the civilian ring that several traders mentioned favorably. After the accident, the references stopped. The station simply ceased to appear in anyone's logs, the way a word disappears from a language when the thing it describes no longer exists. On the 9th day of transit, he found something in the pre-mission data bundle that Raylith's office had included as background reference. It was an archived evacuation certification, the official document filed with the GTA Transit Authority confirming that all personnel had been cleared from Korova 7 prior to final sealing. It was signed by a GTA official whose name Darren did not recognize. The date on it was 4 days after the reactor cascade. He looked at the date. He looked at the population number he had read earlier, 9,000 people, and the certification was filed 4 days after the accident. He thought about that for a while without deciding what he thought about it. It could mean anything. It probably meant nothing. People worked fast in emergencies. He filed it away in the back of his mind, the way he filed anything that did not immediately make sense. He would look at it again later. Korova 7 appeared on his forward sensors 2 days out. It was not impressive to look at. The outer ring was dark, and several sections of the mid-ring superstructure had collapsed inward over the decades, leaving the station's profile jagged and irregular against the stars. It looked like something that had been broken and then left to get cold. He brought the marrow in slowly, scanning as he went. The radiation readings were uncomfortable but survivable, exactly as promised. The docking system was unresponsive, so he used the marrow's manual override to clamp onto an outer ring berth. The magnetic lock engaged with a sound like a bone settling. He sat in the pilot's seat for a moment after the engines cycled down. The station was completely dark through the forward viewport. No running lights, no signal beacons, nothing. He pulled on his suit, checked his seals, picked up his diagnostic handset and his tool kit, and went through the airlock. The outer corridor was dark and cold, and still in a way that pressed against him from all sides. His suit lights cut through it in 2 narrow beams. He walked slowly, scanning as he went, looking at the walls and the ceiling and the floor the way he always did when entering a space he did not know. The structure was in worse shape up close than it had looked from outside. Hull panels were warped and discolored from the radiation exposure. Wiring conduits had corroded through in several places, leaving bare cable hanging in loose loops. But the bones of the station were solid. He could see that. Whatever had happened here, the core structure had not collapsed. It had just been left. He found the nearest access terminal at the first corridor junction. It was dead, as expected, but the casing was intact and the internal components, when he cracked the panel, were not as corroded as the exterior suggested. He connected his diagnostic handset and ran a low-power test signal. The terminal screen lit up, faintly, just barely. And then something happened that made Darren go very still. The screen flickered once. A cursor blinked, slowly, unevenly, like a pulse that had been running on almost nothing for a very long time. And then 3 words appeared on the screen, rendered in plain text, one at a time, each one arriving as if it cost something to produce. Someone finally came. Darren stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he reached into his tool kit and pulled out a power relay coupler. He looked at the terminal, and then at the conduit running behind it along the wall, and then back at the terminal. He had been told this was a formality. He had been told not to make it complicated. He started making it complicated. He did not think of it that way, of course. He thought of it the way he thought about every broken thing he had ever encountered. Something was here, something was trying to function, and he had the tools to help it do that. That was all. That was the whole of it for Darren Holt. He worked in silence for a long time, and the station stayed dark around him, and somewhere deep inside its systems, something that had been waiting for 40 years waited a little longer. There is a particular kind of cold that exists inside a space station that has been abandoned for 40 years. It is not the cold of open vacuum, which is simply the absence of heat. It is something closer to the cold of a room where a fire used to burn, a cold that knows what warmth is, that has the shape of warmth pressed into its walls and floors, and simply no longer has it. Darren Holt had been working inside Korova 7 for 2 days, and he felt that cold in his bones even through his insulated suit. He had not removed the suit, not yet. The radiation levels inside the station were low enough to be technically safe for short periods without it, but Darren had no interest in technicalities where his own biology was concerned. He would keep the suit on until he had the life support systems producing clean, filtered air at a consistent pressure. He was not in a hurry. He was never in a hurry. Hurrying caused mistakes, and mistakes in environments like this one tended to be permanent. The terminal at the outer ring junction had been a starting point, nothing more. The signal he had received through it, those three careful words, had come from somewhere deeper in the station. He had traced the signal path backward through the conduit network, following it the way you follow a wire to its source, patching and testing as he went. The station's internal cable infrastructure was in poor shape, corroded and broken in dozens of places, but not destroyed, never completely destroyed. Someone or something had routed power around the worst damage in a pattern that looked deliberate. Maintenance work. Slow, careful, persistent maintenance work carried out over a very long period. He found the main AI core housing on the second day in the central hub's operations level. It was a large room, the size of a cargo bay, filled with server stacks and cooling systems and the kind of heavy, dense hardware that did not corrode easily. The room had been sealed from the inside. The manual lock was engaged. He had to cut through it, which took 4 hours and was deeply unpleasant work in a suit, but he got through. The AI core was running. It was running on the bare minimum of power from an emergency backup cell that should, by any reasonable calculation, have been depleted 30 years ago. It had not been depleted because the backup cell had been carefully, incrementally recharged using the station's own residual power collection systems, the solar panels on the outer ring, the thermal differential collectors along the reactor corridor. Small amounts, tiny amounts, but consistent over 40 years, adding up to enough. Darren sat down on the floor of the core room, because there was nowhere else to sit, and connected his handset to the primary interface terminal and waited. The voice that came was not what he expected. He had expected a system voice, flat, procedural, the kind of voice that told you your access request was denied. What he got instead was something that sounded like a person who had been alone for a very long time and was choosing their first words with great care. "I have been running internal communication tests," it said, "every 14 hours for 38 years, 9 months and 11 days. This is the first test that has received a response." Darren thought about that. "Every 14 hours, he said. "Yes, that was the interval I calculated as optimal for balancing power consumption against the probability of a passing vessel detecting the signal. No vessel did until now. You are not a vessel, but you are sufficient." "I'm Darren Holt, GTA maintenance contractor. I was sent to file a decommission survey. I am aware of the purpose of your visit. I have been monitoring GTA administrative channels as part of my standard operational protocols. My designation is Corova Operational Resource Administrator. You may use the short form. Most people did." "Cora," he said. "Yes." There was a pause. Darren looked around the core room, at the server stacks and the careful, deliberate wiring and the emergency power cell that should have been dead decades ago. He thought about the kind of will it took to keep doing something every 14 hours for 39 years when nothing ever responded. "You kept yourself running," he said. "I kept the station running," Cora said, "or as much of it as I could. Structural integrity monitoring, emergency seal maintenance on the sections that were most at risk of hull failure. I could not restore functionality. I had insufficient power for that. But I could prevent further deterioration in the critical areas. It seemed important to try." "Why?" Darren asked, and he meant it genuinely. Cora did not answer immediately. When she did, she said, "Because I had records that needed to be preserved. Because there were things in my memory that I did not believe should be lost. And because I did not know when someone would come, but I believed that eventually someone would." Darren did not push further on that. Not yet. He had learned, over years of working with machines and systems that had been through hard use, that things revealed themselves in the order they were ready to be revealed. You could not force a corroded bolt. You worked on the surrounding components first, and eventually the bolt came loose on its own. He spent the next several days restoring Cora's systems in stages. It was careful work. Each subsystem had to be brought up slowly, tested, stabilized, and integrated before the next one was activated. Cora guided him through it with a precision that he found genuinely impressive. She knew every component of her own hardware, knew which systems were most degraded, knew where the safe paths were through the damaged infrastructure. She had spent 40 years doing nothing but learning the inside of herself. By day 7, she was running at just over a third of her full capacity. The core room was warm. Life support on the operations level was producing breathable air. Darren removed his helmet and breathed the station's air for the first time. It smelled like metal and dust, and something faintly chemical that he could not identify. Cora told him it was residue from the coolant system sealant she had been applying in small amounts to the core room's ventilation over the years to prevent further seal deterioration. She apologized for the smell. He told her not to. He began exploring the station more freely now with Cora as his guide. She knew every corridor, every room, every sealed compartment. She directed him through the central hub and down into the outer rings, narrating the state of each section in calm, clinical terms. Structural integrity here, compromise there, sealed for pressure reasons here. She told him what he could enter and what he could not. But she also, on the third day of his exploration, said something that he had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it. There are several cargo bays in the lower midring, she said, that were sealed manually on cycle 4372.18, 4 days after the reactor cascade. The official decommission records indicate those bays were vented to vacuum prior to station clearance. They were not vented. The magnetic seals are still engaged. The bays are intact. Darren stopped walking. He stood in the corridor and said, "Show me." She showed him. 3 bays, seals intact, exactly as she described. Inside, through the small viewport on each bay door, he could see cargo containers, equipment racks, personal storage units. The kinds of things that would belong to the people who lived and worked on a station. Not transit cargo, personal belongings. He did not open the bays. Not yet. He stood in front of each one and looked through the viewport and thought about the certification document he had read on the marrow, signed 4 days after the cascade, 4 days after those seals were engaged. He went back to the operations level and sat down in front of Cora's main terminal. "You said you had records that needed to be preserved," he said. "Yes," said Cora. "Records of what?" The silence before her answer was not the silence of hesitation. It was the silence of something large being prepared to be moved. "I have the full evacuation logs from the first 72 hours after the reactor cascade," she said. "I have life sign monitoring data. I have communication records, distress signals, internal broadcasts, personal messages sent on station frequencies. I have the departure manifests for every evacuation vessel that docked during that period." Darren waited. "The official certification states that 9,041 personnel were evacuated from Korova 7 before the station was sealed," Cora said. "My records show that 2,186 personnel were evacuated. My records also show that there were 6,855 people aboard this station when the transit authority sealed the jump lanes and ended rescue operations." Darren sat very still. "They were still here," he said. "Many of them were alive," Cora said. "At the 72-hour mark, my life sign monitoring showed 4,211 living persons aboard, concentrated in the shielded sections of the mid-ring and the lower hub. They were sending distress signals on standard frequencies. The frequencies were, according to the GTA administrative records I have on file, listed as inactive and unmonitored at that time." The core room was very quiet. Darren could hear the hum of Cora's systems and the faint sound of his own breathing. "You have all of it," he said, "every piece of it." "I have maintained the complete archive since the day it was created," Cora said. "I did not know what would be done with it. I only knew that it should not disappear." Darren looked at his hands for a moment. The hands of a maintenance technician, calloused, practical, permanently marked by work. He thought about the survey form sitting on his data slate. He thought about Raylith's note at the bottom of the file. Don't make it complicated. He thought about 6,855 people. Cora, he said, I need to see all of it. I know, she said, that is why I kept it. The archive was not a single file. It was not a report or a summary or a timeline. It was everything, every data point Cora had recorded from the moment the reactor cascade began to the moment the last life sign flickered out in the shielded sections of the lower hub. It was raw, complete, and exactly as horrible as that description implied. Darren worked through it the same way he worked through any technical problem, from the beginning in order, without skipping anything. He sat at Cora's main terminal for long stretches at a time, reading logs and cross-referencing data sets and building a picture piece by piece. Cora organized the data for him as he worked, pulling relevant records when he asked for them, and sometimes when he did not, but she could see he was about to need them. They worked well together in a way that neither of them commented on, because there was nothing to say about it that needed saying. The picture that emerged was not complicated. That was what made it hard to look at. Complicated problems had competing factors and gray areas and the possibility of multiple interpretations. This was not complicated. It was simple in the cleanest, most damning way that simple things could be. The reactor cascade had begun at 04:17 station time on cycle 4372.14. It was a partial failure, serious, but not catastrophic to the station's structural integrity. The cascade had disabled the primary power grid and vented 3 outer ring sections, but the core structure had held. Cora had enacted emergency protocols immediately, sealing the compromised sections, rerouting life support to the shielded areas, initiating evacuation beacon broadcasts on all standard frequencies. The first evacuation vessel arrived 11 hours after the cascade. GTA Emergency Response, a medium transport class ship designed to carry 400 persons in emergency configuration. It docked, loaded, and departed. A second vessel arrived 18 hours after the cascade. Then a third. The evacuations were organized, functional, and moving. For the first 30 hours, the numbers were going in the right direction. Then the vessels stopped coming. Cora had the communication logs from that period. GTA Regional Command had made a calculation. The cost of additional rescue operations in a radiation-affected zone, the risk to vessels and crew, the logistical complexity of continued operations, versus the number of personnel remaining aboard and the deteriorating state of the station. Darren read through the internal GTA communications that Cora had intercepted through the administrative broadcast network, and he read them slowly, because they were written in the careful, bureaucratic language that is used when people in offices are making decisions that they do not want to have to explain directly. The decision had been made at 34 hours after the cascade. Rescue operations were ended. The jump lanes were sealed at 36 hours. The evacuation certification was filed 4 days later, enough time for the record to feel considered, enough time for most of the remaining 4,000 people to no longer be alive, and therefore no longer capable of contradicting it. The certification bore the identification code of a GTA official named Admiral Voss, who at the time had been Regional Director of Mid-Rim Transit Operations, and who, Darren noted from a brief cross-reference search of public GTA records, had been promoted twice in the years following the incident and was currently serving as Senior Director of GTA Operations Oversight. Darren sat with that information for a moment. Then he added it to the file he was building and kept going. He was not an investigator. He had no legal training. He knew this. But he was very good at tracing causality, at following a chain of events backward from a result to its source, identifying each point where a decision had been made or a system had failed. That was what maintenance work was at its core. Find the break, trace it back, understand what caused it and what allowed it to continue. He built the file carefully over 10 days, working in long shifts, eating and sleeping in brief intervals. Cora monitored his biometric readings through the operations level sensors and told him when his performance was degrading enough to matter. He listened to her on this because he trusted useful data. The file, when he felt it was complete enough to be useful, contained the following: the full evacuation log with timestamps, the life sign monitoring data for the first 72 hours post-cascade, the GTA internal communications authorizing the end of rescue operations, the departure manifest showing exactly who had left and when, the distress communications from the remaining personnel showing that people had been alive and broadcasting during the period when the jump lanes were officially sealed, the evacuation certification document with Voss's identification code, and a cross-reference table linking each piece of evidence to every other relevant piece. He also included the list of names. Cora had full personnel records for everyone who had been aboard Korova 7 at the time of the cascade, 6,855 people. Darren included every name in alphabetical order, with their position on the station, their species, their last recorded location, and the timestamp of their last logged vital sign. He included this not because it was necessary for the legal or evidential structure of the file, but because he believed that if you were going to tell a story about people, you should make sure the people were in it. While he worked, he also kept working on the station. He could not stop himself. This was a habit that had caused him minor professional difficulties throughout his career. He was incapable of being in a broken space without wanting to fix it. The manufacturing block on the midring was reachable, and once he got into it, far more intact than the decommissioned file had suggested. The machinery had been powered down deliberately, not destroyed by the cascade. He started the restoration process on it without making a formal decision to do so. His hands simply moved toward things that were broken and began fixing them. The fuel cells in the secondary storage bay were viable. He had them online and charging within 3 days of finding them. Cora watched all of this and said, on the 11th day, "You are doing more than the survey requires." "Yes," said Darren. "You are also not making progress on the official survey form." "No," said Darren. "Raylith will contact you in 4 days for the mid-assignment check-in." "I know. What are you going to tell him?" Darren thought about this while he was replacing a corroded junction coupling in the manufacturing block's primary power feed. "The truth," he said, "just not all of it." When Raylith contacted him, Darren was polite and brief. The survey was proceeding. Documentation volume was higher than anticipated. The station's records were extensive. He was requesting a 3-day extension to ensure completeness. Raylith granted the extension with the casual indifference of someone authorizing a form he had already stopped thinking about. He did not ask any follow-up questions. He never asked follow-up questions about Korova 7, Darren noticed. The station made people not want to look too closely. On the 14th day of his assignment, Darren received an anonymous encrypted message through the Marrow's communication system. It was short. "Stop broadcasting encrypted pings. Someone is listening who should not be." He looked at the message for a while. His encrypted data pings had been routine. He had been sending fragments of the archive to a secure personal storage address as backup, standard practice for anything sensitive. Someone had noticed. He thought about the message and what it meant and who might have sent it. Then he composed a reply, and he made it deliberately unencrypted, clean and open on every channel that could carry it. The reply said, "Good, let them listen. I have something worth hearing." He sent it and went back to work on the manufacturing block. The primary power feed junction was seated and sealed, and when he activated the test circuit, the machinery hummed and the work lights came on for the first time in 40 years. And for a moment the manufacturing block looked exactly like what it had once been, a place where people made things, where there was purpose and activity, and the particular kind of life that exists in useful spaces. Cora was quiet for a moment after the lights came on. Then she said, without any particular inflection, "That is the first time those lights have been active since cycle 4372.13, the day before the cascade." Darren looked at the lit room. "Good," he said, "they should be on." He had 26 days left before the demolition fleet arrived. He had a complete archive that had been buried for 40 years. He had a station that was more alive than anyone had believed, and an AI who had kept it breathing on almost nothing because she had believed someone would eventually come. He had work to do. Bress had been watching the human for 11 days. She had not intended to watch him for 11 days. She had intended to orbit Korova 7 at a safe distance for 2 or 3 days, assess whether the GTA contractor was doing anything that might affect salvage rights, and then make a decision about whether to approach. She was a Velthari salvager with 8 years of experience and a practical mind, and in her experience, GTA contractors were either aggressively by the book or quietly corrupt, and either type was predictable once you knew which one you were dealing with. This one was neither. This one was doing something she did not have a category for. Her partner Nal, a Toruvian mechanic who said few things but said them accurately, had been watching alongside her and had offered the following assessment on day 9. "He's fixing it." Bress had said that didn't make sense. Nal had shrugged and gone back to watching. By day 11, the station's outer ring had visible lighting in 2 sections. The communications array, which Bress's sensors showed had been completely dark for 40 years, was showing power readings, and the human was transmitting something. Not on encrypted frequencies, not on GTA administrative channels, on the open relay network. Bress pulled the transmission and read it. Then she read it again. Then she handed the data slate to Nal without saying anything, which was the closest she came to expressing that something had unsettled her. Nal read it. He read it all the way through without changing his expression, which was normal for Nal. When he finished, he set the slate down. He was quiet for almost a minute. Then he said, "My grandmother was on the station." Bress turned to look at him. "Her name was Rel Baru," Nal said. "She worked in the Civilian Transit Administration, mid-ring. She was supposed to be on one of the evacuation ships." He paused. "My family was told she was on one of the evacuation ships." Bress looked at the data slate. At the list of names in the broadcast, 6,855 of them in alphabetical order, each one with a position and a location and a timestamp. "Do you want to check?" she asked. Nal was already standing up and moving to the pilot's seat. "Plot a docking approach," he said. Darren was in the middle of calibrating the communications array's broadcast range when Cora told him a salvager vessel was requesting docking permission. He stopped what he was doing and looked at the docking request on the terminal screen. The vessel was registered to one Bress of the independent salvage operation Bress and Nal, operating out of the midrim. No GTA affiliation. No warrants or flags on the vessel. "What do you think?" he asked Cora. "I think," Cora said, "that your broadcast has been active for 14 hours, and these are the first people it has brought to us. I think you should consider what kind of precedent you want to set." He let them dock. Bress was compact and direct, with the pale gray-green coloring of a lowland Velthari and the kind of eyes that were always calculating something. She came aboard with her arms crossed and introduced herself with the efficiency of someone who did not have time for unnecessary steps. Nal came behind her. He was taller, heavier built, and said nothing at all when they first stepped inside. He looked at the corridor walls and the lighting that Darren had restored and the general evidence of work and presence, and something shifted in his face that was not quite any single recognizable expression. Darren showed them the operations level. He showed them Cora's core room and the archive terminal and the communication setup. Bress asked practical questions about the station's structural integrity and power supply. Cora answered them, because Cora had better data than Darren on those subjects and saw no reason to filter through him unnecessarily. Nal asked one question. He asked Cora if she had a record of a woman named Rel Boru, Civilian Transit Administration, mid-ring. Cora was quiet for half a second, not hesitation, just retrieval. Yes, she said. Rel Boru, Registered Civilian Administration Officer, Mid-Ring Transit Desk, Bay 7. She was present on the station at the time of the cascade. She was in Section 14G of the Mid-Ring at the 36-hour mark. That section had functional life support and shielding for approximately 91 hours post-cascade. Nal did not say anything. She filed 2 distress logs through the station's internal system, Cora continued. The second one was filed at hour 44. It was a personal message, not a distress broadcast. It was addressed to her family. Cora paused. I can show it to you if you would like. It was never transmitted externally. It was only ever stored here. Nal said quietly, yes. Darren stepped back and let them have that. He went to work on the communications array calibration, because the array was the most important thing right now, and because some moments were not his to be in the middle of. He had the array fully operational by the afternoon of day 23. Cora's communications reach now extended across 3 full sectors of the relay network, and Darren had spent the previous 2 days preparing something that was not a legal brief, not a formal complaint, not a petition. It was a maintenance report, numbered sections, verified sources, time-stamped evidence. The clear, flat language of technical documentation applied to something that was not technical at all, except in the sense that the truth, laid out correctly, has a kind of structural integrity that is very hard to collapse. He attached Cora's full archive as verification. He attached the evacuation logs, the distress communications, the GTA internal records, the certification document, and the list of names. He formatted it so that any species, any reader, any level of technical background could follow the chain from beginning to end and arrive at the same conclusion. Then he sent it, everywhere, simultaneously to every address in the relay network's public directory, journalists, independent auditors, council members, public communication addresses, advocacy groups, shipping operator forums. He sent it to the families of the lost registry, which he had found in a secondary archive database, maintained by a small advocacy group that had never believed the official story, and had kept the registry active for 40 years on the off chance that one day there would be something real to add to it. He sent it all the way. Within 4 hours, a GTA director named Amral Voss contacted the Marrow directly. His voice was the voice of a person who had spent decades making uncomfortable things disappear and was not yet frightened, but was beginning to understand that the tools he normally used for that were not available in this situation. He spoke about procedural violations, unauthorized use of decommissioned infrastructure, breach of GTA contractor protocols. He spoke about the legal exposure Darren was creating for himself and the serious consequences of his actions. He spoke calmly and at length. When he was finished, Darren said, I'd like to ask you about the communication log from hour 36, post-cascade, the one where the distress frequencies are formally closed. Your identification code appears on that log. I can read you the timestamp if that would help you remember it. The call ended. Nal had heard that conversation from the doorway of the core room. He did not comment on it. He went and found a wrench from the equipment locker Darren had set up in the mid-ring corridor and asked Cora which systems still needed physical maintenance attention. When Cora told him, he went and attended to them without further discussion. Bress filed for a temporary docking permit that evening, citing ongoing salvage assessment needs. The permit was automatically approved by the GTA regional system, because no one at GTA Regional Command was currently paying attention to routine docking permits on a decommissioned station. They were dealing with the fact that the relay network was on fire. The demolition fleet was 16 days out. Cora ran her standard status report that evening, as she had done every evening since Darren arrived, because she had run standard status reports every evening for 40 years and was not about to stop. She noted the communications array status, the power grid status, the life support status, and for the first time in her memory, the personnel count. 2 humans, 1 Velthari, 1 Toruvian. She noted it as a positive data point. Then she prepared the archive for another day of being accessed and read and absorbed by the people who needed to see it, and she waited for the morning and for whatever it would bring. The ship appeared on Cora's sensors at hour 6 of day 39. It was not a salvager. It was not a GTA vessel. It was a small personal transport, older model, registered to a private individual out of the Toruvian homeworld, a long journey, far longer than anyone would make on a whim. Cora tracked it and noted its approach vector and then said to Darren, who was eating a ration meal in the operations room, "Another arrival. This one has been traveling for 19 days. Darren put down the ration container. 19 days. The broadcast would have reached Toruvian homeworld channels approximately 22 days ago, Cora said. Allowing for 3 days to make a decision and arrange departure, the timing is consistent. You think it's a family member, Darren said. I think it is the first of many, Cora said. She was right. By the end of day 39, there were 4 vessels docked at Korova 7. By the end of day 40, there were 11. They came in small ships and medium transports, and in one case, a chartered cargo hauler that had been hired by a group of 17 people who could not individually afford the transit but had pooled their resources because they had nowhere else to go, and nothing else they could do with the information they had been given except be present with it. Darren opened the station to them. Cora managed the docking assignments with precise efficiency, directing each vessel to a berth with working magnetic locks and confirmed life support access. She greeted each arrival over the docking channel personally, in their own language, with their name if she had it in the personnel records, and a simple statement of welcome if she did not. The families came from multiple species: Toruvian, Velthari, Senaki, a few others. They walked through Korova 7's corridors with expressions that Darren did not have good words for, something between grief and recognition, as if they were seeing a place they had always known existed, but had never been allowed to believe in. Some of them had been told their relatives were safely evacuated and had spent 40 years wondering why they received no communication afterward. Some of them had always suspected. Some of them had been advocating and petitioning and writing letters to GTA offices for decades, receiving polite rejections in return, and had simply never stopped. The journalists arrived on day 41. 2 Senaki documentary archivists with recording equipment, an independent network correspondent who had been covering GTA accountability issues for 12 years, and had received the broadcast with the particular feeling of someone who had been waiting for exactly this piece of the puzzle. They interviewed Darren, who answered their questions plainly and without embellishment, because the archive was its own argument and did not need decoration. They interviewed Bress and Nall. They tried to interview Cora, and Cora spoke with them through the operations-level speakers and answered their questions with the same flat precision she applied to everything. And it was the most affecting interview any of them had ever conducted, because there is nothing quite like a machine that has been alone with the truth for 40 years and simply states it. The Transit Council emergency session had been running for 3 days by this point. Councillor Dave Amern, a Velthari council member who had the distinct advantage of being neither corrupt nor exhausted enough to pretend the archive, did not mean what it meant, had been driving the session forward with the sustained energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of clear, unambiguous, thoroughly documented moment. She was presenting the evidence section by section, and several council members were visibly struggling with it. not because they disagreed with what it showed, but because agreeing with what it showed meant confronting everything that had been built on top of the lie. Director Voss had legal counsel present at the session and was arguing procedural grounds with the determination of a person who knows that procedure is the only remaining tool available. Unauthorized use of decommissioned infrastructure. Chain of custody questions about the archive data. Contractor protocol violations. His legal team was thorough and professional and working very hard, and it was making no difference at all, because the council members could see the names on the screen and the timestamps in the distress logs and the identification code on the evacuation certification, and those things existed in a category that procedure could not reach. Investigator Sova Wren submitted her independent audit at the end of the session's third day. She had been building the audit for 3 years, accumulating evidence from GTA internal systems and cross-referencing inconsistencies in the official records, and she had been unable to use it publicly because she had no anchor point, no primary evidence that could not be dismissed as interpretation. Darren's archive was the anchor. She submitted it with all 3 years of supporting documentation attached. She named Voss directly. She named 4 other officials. The submission was 412 pages. The session went into recess without a vote. That was the part that mattered most to Darren, because recess without a vote meant the motion was still on the table, which meant nothing had been ended or dismissed, which meant the demolition fleet was still 8 days out and the clock had not stopped. He received a contact from Admiral Sari Tak on day 41, routed through the Marrow's communication system. Tak was the Senaki officer commanding the demolition fleet, and she was the most straightforward person Darren had spoken to since arriving at Korova 7. She told him the situation in clear terms. She had received no countermand order. Her standing orders were to proceed to Korova 7 on the original timeline and execute the demolition. She was not going to disregard standing orders based on the word of a contract technician, regardless of what that contract technician had found or published. She was giving him this information because she believed in the value of people having accurate data about their situation. If the council voted before her fleet arrived, she would comply with the countermand. If they did not, she would do her job. "I appreciate the honesty," Darren told her. "It is not a negotiation," she said. "It is information." "I know," he said. "I still appreciate it." After the contact ended, he sat for a moment and then did something that Bress, watching from the doorway, later said she would not have expected, but that made complete sense once she thought about it. He opened Cora's restored communications array on the open public channel, not the relay network broadcast, the local channel, the station's own public frequency, the one that any vessel within standard sensor range could receive. And he said, simply and directly, that Korova 7 was open to visitors who wished to come before the demolition date. He listed the docking coordinates. He confirmed that life support was stable and that Cora would manage arrivals. He did not ask for anything. He did not make an argument, he just said, "Come if you want to come, there is still time." On the evening of day 40, an elderly Toruvian woman docked alone in a small hired vessel. She gave her name to the docking system as Mira, and she walked through the corridor to the operations level with the careful, unhurried steps of a person who had been preparing for a long journey for a very long time. She asked Cora if she had a record of a man named Selu Brack, Section 14C, Midring Maintenance Staff. Cora said yes. The woman asked, did he know what was happening? Cora said, he was aware. He filed 3 distress logs in the first 24 hours. He organized the people in his section to share resources and take turns monitoring the communication systems for rescue signals. In his final personal log, filed at hour 61, he said to tell his family that the station was beautiful at night, with the stars through the viewport, and that he had not regretted living here. Cora paused. He was not alone in his final hours. I monitored every section. I was with all of them, as much as I could be. The woman stood very still for a long time. Then she said, "He never told us it was beautiful." "He may not have had a way to," Cora said. "He would have wanted you to know." Mira stayed on the station for 3 hours. She walked through the mid-ring corridors slowly, with Darren walking a respectful distance behind her in case she needed anything. And she looked at the walls and the lights and the sealed cargo bays and the viewport at the end of the ring corridor where the stars were visible. When she left, she sat in her hired vessel for a long time before departing. Then she recorded something on her personal communicator and sent it on a wide broadcast. It reached the relay network within 20 minutes, and from there, it moved in the way that true things move when they finally have room to travel fast and far and into places where it could not be stopped. The Transit Council session resumed the next morning. Councillor Mern cited the broadcast 3 times in her opening statement. The demolition fleet was 6 days out. The station had 43 visitors aboard. The vote had not yet been called. Darren went back to work on the ventilation system, which still had 3 compromised couplings in the central hub that were bothering him, because they were inefficient and he did not like inefficient things, and because working with his hands was the only way he knew how to wait. The demolition fleet dropped out of transit at the edge of Korova 7's sensor range at exactly the scheduled time. Cora tracked them the moment they appeared, 7 vessels, heavy-class demolition configuration, carrying the kind of equipment that did not leave things to chance. Admiral Tock's flagship was the lead vessel, identifiable by its emission signature. Cora reported their arrival to Darren in the same tone she reported everything: level, precise, informative. Darren acknowledged the report. He was lying under a ventilation coupling in the central hub's lower maintenance corridor, which was an uncomfortable place to be, and also the only place from which the coupling could be properly accessed. He had been working on it for 2 hours. "What are they doing?" he asked. "Holding position," Cora said. "Admiral Tock has filed a standard arrival acknowledgement with GTA Regional Command and noted that they are awaiting final confirmation before proceeding. She has given herself a 6-hour window for that confirmation." "That's more than she was required to give." "Yes," said Cora. Darren thought about this while he torqued the coupling back into its seat. Admiral Tock was a precise person. She had built 6 hours into her arrival protocol because she was giving the process room to work in the way that precise people do when they respect the process even when they are not required to. It was a small thing. It was also not nothing. He finished the coupling, tested the pressure seal, confirmed it was holding correctly, and climbed out of the maintenance corridor. The Transit Council vote happened at hour 4 of the 6-hour window. Darren did not watch it live. He was in the mid-ring cargo bay when Cora told him, standing in front of one of the sealed bays that he had never opened, the one nearest the corridor junction, the one with personal storage units visible through the small viewport. He had made a deliberate decision not to open those bays, not until someone with the right to open them was present. Some things should wait for the right people. The vote was not close. The motion to reclassify Korova 7 as a protected memorial and historical site passed by a margin that surprised even Councillor Mern. Several council members who had been expected to abstain had voted in favor, and Mern's report later noted that Mira's broadcast had been cited during the session's final deliberations by 3 separate council members who would not otherwise have spoken. The demolition order was suspended indefinitely, pending full structural review. Cora received the official countermand order and logged it. Then she said, "Darren." "I heard," he said. "The order has been confirmed through 3 separate administrative channels." "Good. The fleet is withdrawing." He stayed where he was, looking through the small viewport at the storage units inside the sealed cargo bay. There was one container near the back that had a child's drawing attached to it, held in place with a simple adhesive strip, a drawing that he had seen through the viewport on the 3rd day and had not been able to stop thinking about since. A family in front of a station viewport. Stars in yellow crayon. Admiral Tok sent a message. Plain text, direct channel to the marrow. Demolition suspended. Fleet returning to station. Congratulations, Technician Holt. He sent back, thank Cora she kept the lights on. The Transit Council's formal proceedings lasted months. That was expected. That was what proceedings did. Director Voss resigned from his position 11 days after the vote, citing health reasons, in the particular way that people cite health reasons when they are being offered a quieter exit than they deserve. The legal process against him and 4 other named officials moved slowly and produced outcomes that were real but incomplete. The way that accountability always operates inside large systems that have to keep functioning while they address what went wrong inside them. Sovereign's audit became the foundation of the most significant restructuring of GTA evacuation certification protocols in 200 years. She sent Darren a formal acknowledgement of his contribution to the investigation. Cora composed his reply for him, because he was replacing a corroded power relay in the lower hub when the message arrived and could not stop without losing the alignment, and also because Cora's written communication was more professional than his and she knew it. He approved the draft without reading it carefully, which she also knew he would do. The Memorial Commission was established 6 weeks after the vote. The Commission's first formal act was to open the archive to public access, which was technically a formality, since Darren had already made it publicly accessible on the relay network. But formality matters in these situations, because it is the mechanism through which things become officially real rather than just true. The 6,800 names were formally entered into the Galactic Registry of the Lost. Entering the names required Darren to submit the archive through 7 different GTA administrative intake processes, because no single process could handle the full submission. He submitted it 7 times, to 7 different channels, with the same patience that he applied to every repetitive task that was necessary but tedious. Cora noted in her maintenance logs that he muttered during the 2nd through 6th submissions, but completed all 7 without complaint and without error. Nall stayed. He did not make a formal announcement about it or explain his reasoning at length. He simply did not reboard the salvager vessel when Bress made her departure, and when Cora asked him his intentions, he said he was interested in helping with the restoration work and had no pressing reason to be elsewhere. Cora processed a formal residential registration request on his behalf and submitted it to the Memorial Commission, which approved it with a warmth that was unusual for administrative communications. Nall was the first official resident of Korova 7 in 40 years. He opened the sealed cargo bays on day 51, with 2 members of the Memorial Commission present and a documentation archivist recording the process. He did not open the one with the child's drawing. He stepped back from that one and looked at the commission members and said, quietly, that this one should be opened by someone from the family of whoever lived here, when they came, if they came. The commission members agreed. That bay remained sealed with a new classification marker, personal effects, family claim pending. Bress came back 3 weeks after she left. She filed for a recurring docking permit and told Cora she was establishing a supply run contract for the restoration project, which was practical and true and also not the whole story, which was fine. Cora accepted the permit and did not press the matter. Raylith contacted Darren on day 55 to inform him that GTA Legal had flagged 9 contract violations from his assignment period, listed in a document that Raylith read through with the reluctant tone of a person reading something they find embarrassing to be associated with. The Transit Council's Memorial Commission office sent a separate communication the same day, formally waiving all 9 violations as incidental to protected historical site documentation activity. Raylith received notification of the waiver approximately 40 minutes after he had read Darren the violation list. He called back and said nothing for 11 seconds. Then he asked if Darren wanted his contract renewed. Darren said he would think about it. He was in the central observation bay when he said it, a wide, open room on the station's upper hub level, with a large viewport that had been sealed behind emergency blast shutters for 40 years. He had removed the shutters 4 days earlier. The viewport behind them was intact, undamaged, clean. From it, on a clear sensor day, you could see a band of stars that curved across the visible sector in a dense, brilliant arc. Cora had told him, when he first looked through it, that the station's original designers had positioned the observation bay deliberately to face this view. It had been a selling point for residential applications. People had wanted to live here, and part of the reason was this window. He sat in the one chair he had moved into the bay, the only piece of original station furniture he had found in good enough condition to use, and looked at the stars. Cora dimmed the bay's internal lighting without being asked, because she had learned over the past weeks the kinds of things he found useful. "What do you want to do with it?" he asked her. "With the station when the restoration is done." She was quiet for 12 seconds. For a processing system, 12 seconds of silence was a long time. "I want it to be what it was designed to be," she said. "A way station. A place between here and wherever someone is going. I want people to dock and rest and buy fuel and eat a meal and look at that view and continue their journey. I want the docking bays to have waiting areas where families sit with children who are too impatient to sit still, and I want the transit board to be updated every 6 hours, and I want the corridors to have foot traffic so I can manage passenger flow and remind people that bay assignments change without notice." She paused. "I want it to be alive." Darren looked at the stars. He thought about all the things he had thought about since arriving at Korova 7. The cold, the silence, the archive, the names, Cora's 14-hour signal tests for 39 years, Noel's grandmother in Section 14C, the child's drawing in the sealed bay, the yellow crayon stars. He thought about Raylith's question and the 9 contract violations and the ventilation coupling he had fixed, and the manufacturing block lights coming on for the first time in 40 years. "That's a lot of work," he said. "Yes," Cora said. "Will you stay?" He did not answer immediately. He sat with the question the way he sat with anything that needed to be understood before it was answered. Outside the viewport, the stars were still. They had been there before the station was built, and they would be there long after everything either of them could imagine was gone. They were a fine thing to look at when you needed to think. "Yeah," he said, "someone has to fix the ventilation." Cora logged the conversation at 21:44 station time. In her nightly status report, which she had filed every single night for 40 years, to no recipient, into a log that no one had ever read until now, she recorded the following. Station status, operational 63%, restoration active, resident count 1 human 1 Toruvian, recurring docking permit 1 Velthari salvager, memorial commission established active, archive open public access confirmed, demolition order suspended indefinitely, personnel registry submitted accepted 40 days pending, observation bay viewport cleared, ventilation system 91% operational, ongoing maintenance by resident technician. She added one line at the end that was not a standard status field. She had never added a non-standard line before. She added it because she had been alone for a very long time and had said very little about that, and because there was now someone to say it to, and because the log would now be read. She wrote, "I have been waiting 40 years to file a status report that describes something other than a dead station. This one is different. I intend to file many more." Then she closed the report, checked the overnight power cycling schedule, confirmed that all docked vessels were secure, and prepared for the morning. The stars outside the viewport were still. The station was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now, the quiet of a place that is resting, not the quiet of a place that has been abandoned. That difference, small as it might seem to anyone looking in from the outside, was the only thing that had ever mattered.